Alright, let's talk about two more relatively new releases. One just came out on Netflix, obviously, over New Year's Eve. And one of these has been out for what feels like forever, but I only just now got around to it. So we'll talk about those, and I think we'll start with The Lost Daughter, which, as all the stuff you've probably seen tells you, Maggie Gyllenhaal's directorial debut and screenwriting debut also, I think. And it's adapted from a book that I read recently, and the reason I was able to read it so quickly recently was it is very, very slender. It is like barely over 100 pages, like 120 pages or something. So my first concern was how that was going to stretch out to a movie that was pretty much right on the 2 hour mark. But I was interested in how exactly it was going to go because I don't think the book, or at least for me, the book wasn't really perfect, I guess you could say, as far as like the way the story was told and how it kind of came to this really abrupt outcome. And it was like, well, the book is certainly engrossing and extremely well written. It seemed like there was a lot of room for adaptation, and then I got a bit more optimistic about that when there was like a panel recently for indie actors that like Ann Dowd and Nicolas Cage and a few others were at. Simon Rex was there, and Dakota Johnson was there promoting this, and she had talked specifically about one of the great things about Gyllenhaal's screenplay was the way in which she adapted, not just the writing from in the script itself, but the way it was adapted from the book and the changes that she made and how that sort of kind of helped enrich the story as far as putting it actually on screen. So all of that does pretty much add up to what this final product is. I guess the only problem is when you've read, it's one of those. The movie and Gyllenhaal take a much more mysterious kind of approach, where the book was a bit more blatant about its secrets. Right, the book still had a gradual way about itself, but the way the movie's set up is there's a lot to kind of unravel, and stuff is kind of kept from the audience just a little bit longer. And then when we learn stuff a lot later, which is kind of contradicted a little bit by the opening scene, because I wasn't sure, especially knowing the whole story, I wasn't sure how I felt about this being one of the many movies that takes that technique where they really want to get the audience involved immediately and get them hooked immediately. So they take a snippet from the end and put it as the opening sequence, and then we go back and then we come full circle. I don't know for a movie that's being this mysterious about itself how good of a call that is, but it's one of those cases where oftentimes I've mentioned that it almost feels like a lack of confidence in regards to being able to pull your audience in with the beginning of the story, but that a lot of people take that approach, and I guess it's kind of mainly for that hook feeling, but I don't think it was that necessary, but that's the way it goes. If there's one thing that I feel like people might struggle with as far as this movie goes, and a lot of this is something that's can always be defended by it just shows how effective it was made and how real the characters feel that you would have these reactions. But this idea, pretty much every character, almost every character in this movie is basically a piece of shit. and like if you were to be right there with the rest of the characters, these people would be unbearable to be around. And I mean like I said, almost all of them, like including the lead characters. There's like one or two side characters that are like seem like relatively nice people, but other than that, I was having flashbacks to Mare of Easttown, where as great as Mare of Easttown is, and as effectively as the characters are played, it's like it's almost unbearable to be around these characters just for the short amount of time these stories take place on screen, let alone imagine being within these worlds. But like I said, I think another way that works, apart from just saying like, oh, it's effective because they're supposed to be pieces of shit, so that's how you feel about them aggressively. But the way that they do kind of have, like, we do play with like the expectations of what we have for the characters and how they kind of go back and forth a little bit, where somebody might seem like a real piece of shit, but then they'll do kind of a kind gesture, and you start to kind of turn around on them, but then they'll turn around and still be a piece of shit, and it's like there's just kind of that constant place where you're never quite sure how you're gonna feel about a character when they return, and then how you're gonna feel about them by the end of the scene you've just seen. and how that's going to kind of differ from scene to scene for pretty much most of these characters, which is really fun because there's definitely an unpredictable nature to most of the movie, but not necessarily just like the actions in general and the way the story unfolds, but just the characters in general and how they're gonna react to certain things. Because a lot of the unpredictability in this also comes from the fact that the way characters react to specific things, especially Coleman being front and center in this. And I think what's really great about what Coleman does here also specifically is not only is she just kind of incredible in this, but if you want to take like a real life perception into account, and how when you see Olivia Colman like in interviews or during her Oscar speech or something, she seems like one of like the nicest and most personable people out there, and just like an extremely pleasant person like through and through. And to play this character that is immediately so effectively cold and makes you really uneasy because you're not exactly sure what she's done. If you haven't read the book, you don't know what she's done up to this point, and gotten to this point, and how she's gotten so shut off from everything. And a lot of the choices she makes, one of which is such a big choice that it sets off the whole movie, the whole story, and seems like something that's really reckless and harmful for seemingly no reason. And it's, as things unravel, though, what's interesting about this is when you look at this character or all the other characters that may be immediately off-putting, is it does this seemingly impossible task where it puts you enough in the shoes of some of these characters and in their mindsets that somebody could seem like completely irredeemable, maybe even Coleman's character. And you kind of get into that for a while, and it's like, it's really hard to follow this person because they're so cold, because they're so seemingly in this weird blurry middle ground between calculating and reckless. It's really, you just have no idea where she's coming from. But when we get to see why, or not necessarily why, but where she came from initially, because obviously we have a lot of flashback scenes where she's played by Jessie Buckley when she was younger. And so we see, like, we get glimpses of her background. There's still, the explanations, if you want to call them that, are still kind of vague in general, but I do think there's something more interesting. But, like, it would be too cliche if the flashback scenes just completely spelled out why Coleman is the way she is in present day. Which is very interesting. So it still leaves little mysteries there, and this is kind of the problem I had with the book, was there were some things that almost seemed too vague, which is especially weird because it's literally from her point of view in the book. But here I think there's little mysteries that remain still kind of work, whereas it felt like kind of like the book was kind of missing pieces a little bit, and was too abrupt in some of its turns and ultimately its ending. So I can see where it was very, like, a lot of the acclaim from this has to come from how Gyllenhaal specifically adapted it and a lot of the choices she had to make, because she could have just copied and pasted. And there are obviously a lot of scenes in this that are directly from the book. If anything, I'd say probably most of the book is in this. There's just more, there's more elaboration, or that she kind of waits a little longer to reveal certain things. But adding those things does have, like, you can actually see where it enriches what the idea was, like Dakota Johnson was talking about in that panel. And seeing her interactions with some specific characters, especially when they kind of seem like they're the opposite of her. One performance that actually stood out in this, and I wasn't really sure exactly where this character was going, because I don't remember this character being prominent in the book, if he's in it at all. I really don't remember, and I read the book relatively recently. The Ed Harris character, that she meets up with periodically throughout it, there's some sort of thing here where it's like you would think in another story they would have a thing for each other, but it's like you can tell he kind of has a thing for her, but she's so unreadable, we can never quite tell. Like, just in general, whenever she's interacting with any character, we're never sure if she likes being around them, or she can't wait to get away from them, or wishes they would go away. It's like, it's really hard to read throughout. But while that sounds like a criticism, I think it actually benefits the movie and the intriguing nature of Coleman's character in general. But as far as Ed Harris's performance here, what's really interesting is he's one of like the two characters I was talking about where it's like he's actually like one of the nice people here that doesn't seem to have this. There's one thing they say towards the end that might make him just a tiny, tiny bit shady, but nothing too completely unforgivable. And and that's another thing too, where it's like where Coleman seems to be playing this character that you would almost never expect out of her if you were strictly judging by what she seems like in real life. And Ed Harris is somebody that I've always found really like intimidating. Like I felt like if I met him in real life, I'd be terrified of him, even though I really don't know about his real life persona at all much. He just has this real intensity about him usually. So to see him as this character that's like, the one that's willing to approach and has this sort of sweet nature to him, and the way he talks to her in like their second scene, when it's almost like he's trying to pick her up or something. He's almost got this vibe of like a guy that maybe had game like back in the day, and he's like kind of trying to rekindle that feeling or something. And you can look into that, and even though his character just kind of comes in and out, and ultimately doesn't have an enormous purpose in the grand scheme of things, there's just character moments like that can kind of stick with you, and you can wonder about the side characters that we don't learn near enough about as we do the people that are at the center, like Coleman. Um, and that performance and that kind of character coming from Ed Harris kind of caught me by surprise a little bit. He's played tender characters in the past, but that's like I said, just the sort of juxtaposition of the way you view these actors and the kind of opposite characters they're playing in this really shines in this particular movie and these performances. Um, and then yeah, talking about Jessie Buckley being here, um, what's really interesting about these flashback scenes and what makes Buckley's performance so great is, first of all, I wasn't sure how much screen time she was going to get because the first few times we see her, the editing is done in this really great way where we only see like kind of flashes of her where it's like the scenes are kind of fleeting like it would be if it's like when Coleman just sees something that reminds her of the past. And you just get like this really brief glimpse of a memory and then it's gone again. Or it comes in like, small amounts at a time. Is what Buckley is for a little bit. And then as the movie goes on, we get bigger and bigger chunks of the past as it goes on. And like I said, we get a look at her and like where she came from as far as the previous events in her life. Like I said, the sort of lack of explanation of still why exactly her character makes some of the choices that she does is mostly just in kind of just watching the events unfold, where it's where I was talking about getting in the perspectives of the characters' heads, even if they seem like assholes. And one of the main traits of this character seems to be that she's just incredibly selfish. And if it benefits her or if it makes her feel better, she's just gonna go for it regardless of who it hurts in the process. And to get a glimpse of what we see of her in her younger days when we meet her children, that we don't see in present day other than through like seeing their name on her phone. It puts you enough in the mindset of, okay, she's an asshole and she's super selfish, but I kind of get it a little. Like when you see the hecticness of her life and how literally, like, getting in the mindset of a mother that's so overwhelmed and how like every waking moment can seem like a headache. There are scenes in this movie with her children that are absolutely headache inducing. And if that wasn't the point, if that wasn't putting us directly in the mindset of the character, it would be something that I hate. It's like how a lot of the reasons I didn't care for the Babadook was the screaming kid, because I just thought it was excessive and it made me want to rip my hair out. In this case, it's like, this is driving me insane and giving me such a headache, but it's like, we're in the character. Like, that's that's where it's coming from. This is why the character makes the decisions that she makes. And also, I would honestly be traumatized. I can't remember how many kids Gyllenhaal and Peter Sarsgaard have. I know they have at least one daughter, and it's like, I wonder if like that would be traumatizing to look back on your mom's first movie and see how the daughters are portrayed to the mother when they were much younger, and it's like, oh God, was that me or something? It's like that would be terrifying to think that was the inspiration, but it very effectively puts you in the character's head as far as her feeling overwhelmed and like she's in a place where she just can't take it anymore. So that's effectively done. Like I said, might be pretty off-putting to a lot of audiences. Like I said, it's you got to do it really skillfully, or your audience is going to give up, much like the main character does. But here I can see where the line is and where it's like it's for the sake of getting us to feel what the character feels to an extent. But we can still kind of look back and say, oh, this character made a lot of the wrong moves. But it's like it's almost like the more wrong moves she makes, the more surprising the character is, because you're never quite sure exactly what lengths of the wrong thing she's willing to do throughout it, which is really kind of fun to see how far that's going to go. And what's also interesting about that is that might seem like to have a character at the center that's that off-putting, but to be surrounded by off-putting characters. It's like when we get these early scenes when she's interacting with Dakota Johnson's family, and like I said, just all these people are assholes, like the whole group of them, Coleman included. And it's like, and they're always like giving her death glares and stuff like that, and she's always seemingly looking down on them. And it's like, it's clear in this really unnerving way that somebody doesn't belong here, but you're never quite sure if it's her that doesn't belong or it's them, and which one is intruding on which one. Or it's, you can, honestly, you with them all being assholes, you can almost just look at it from the perspective of the location itself, and it's like everybody's an intruder. And that's just a wild idea. So, and that's the thing too about it just kind of feeling unnerving in general is the way I've talked about it up to this point. Obviously, it's like a character drama and stuff like that, but the way, just the feeling, the opening scene probably has a lot to do with this as well. The opening scene that comes a little too early, I think, is setting up a tone here where this could just be, you know, Olivia Colman's at the beach and she meets other people and we learn about her past, and that could just be all the movie is. But just the tone that it sets and it keeps throughout it, it always feels like it's sort of walking this really thin tightrope, and she's kind of wavering. And on this side, it's the character drama. It's, hey, here's Olivia Colman at the beach, and here's all these people, and here's, you know, the locals and how they interact. And on the other side is like a full-on thriller. Not like, oh, somewhat thriller, not vaguely thriller. Full-on thriller is waiting on this side, and the movie's just right here, kind of teasing which direction it's going to go in, which is really fun. Like, even when you know, like if you read the book or something, you know the direction that it's going, Gyllenhaal did make just enough changes and really establishes the tone so well that you're still kind of on edge, like, almost like you're still not quite sure what's going to happen. Everything pretty much unfolds like it does in the book, but it's still like, there's always that little bit of doubt if what you might expect is going to be around the corner is what's going to be there or not, or if it's going to be something else or something more sinister or what. And the way this builds throughout, I do think it may not need to be as long as it is. This probably could have worked at like an hour 45, if not shorter, but it's it still really accomplishes all those feelings that it's going to put you through. Like I said, a lot of intense ones, and they're certainly not going to be pleasant by any means. But I do think it really serves the story to feel that way. Like, if it feels like the movie's just giving you an absolute headache and you're ready to just... If you're almost ready to turn it off, it's probably doing its job. So there is that. And like I said, with the center of it being here, Coleman's performance, and just how incredibly uncomfortable it is to, like, for an actress that's so easy to watch normally, to be so constantly uncomfortable just watching her go about her day-to-day life, even when there's nobody around for her to have like cringy interactions with, just seeing her by herself, you just get the sense that something's really off, and that sort of tone carries it really well as well. So yeah, so I would say this is one where like it really took the source material and kind of, I mean, it's hard to say like improved on it, but like really used it to its advantage as far as kind of telling a story that feels like it has a bit more meat to it, and you can really use the medium in a lot of more effective ways. So yeah, so it is very well done, and a very promising start for Gyllenhaal to do this. Hopefully regularly or relatively regularly. So yeah, so let's go on to the other movie, which is Come On, Come On, which I guess I should start off by saying that if I'm not like really overwhelmingly ecstatic about this movie, I guess it's a Mike Mills thing because people were really blown away by Beginners and people really, really like 20th Century Women. Um, and I know he has another movie that I can't think of off the top of my head, but I'm sure I saw it also. But those are the two that come to mind. And Beginners was a movie that I liked and didn't love, and 20th Century Women was a movie that I liked and didn't love. So I'm assuming it's just like I can really appreciate his style and certainly appreciate his writing. But so far, I have yet to just be really, like enamored by a movie of his. Like I can respect his movies, but I almost feel like I'm kind of at a distance with them. And this pretty much fits that bill pretty much exactly. Like I would really put this on par with Beginners and 20th Century. He has a very consistent career, Mike Mills does, which for as talented as he is still very good. So we do have a plot here that seems like it'd be quite familiar, where the guy who's kind of at this sort of point in his life where he's somewhere in the 40s range and he's got some things going on, but he's also got a lot that he really needs to work out. Is saddled with a kid for various reasons, and they have to connect and all that. And usually the plot there involves the guy like growing up more and coming more to terms with responsibility and shit like that. But the fact that this is a Mike Mills movie that stars Joaquin Phoenix in this role, there's probably going to be a little more to it than that. There is a lot of stuff in here that I'm sure is supposed to be deeper, is intended to be deeper, but kind of comes off surface level. But as far as that particular relationship that's usually a cliche, is done in an interesting way here, where it's, I think the kid in particular plays a huge part in this. Woody Norman, I think his name is. And first of all, what blows my mind about this is I only just recently learned that apparently this kid is British, which I never would have guessed watching this at all. So when kids can accomplish that at such an early age is always impressive. I would have never guessed this kid wasn't American. The thing that's going to make or break a movie like this most of the time, and probably in this case too, is it's real funny. Both of these movies we're talking about could basically be like basically birth control the movie for both of them. But here, obviously the kids aren't seen as much of a headache in this as they were in The Lost Daughter, but what usually makes or breaks movies like this is how tolerable the child is, whether it be the performance of the character or anything. And this is a character that is intentionally sort of obnoxious, and it's and a kid that seems like it'd be very hard to connect with. But that's what the early conflict is. They connect a lot earlier than you might expect them to, which is another thing where it kind of feels like it subverts a cliche just a little bit. But the relationship between them in particular does feel like there's something much more real to it, whereas when you think about this particular storyline, how much of the work just the script does in making them grow closer. But the fact that it happens not only as quick as it seems to, but how like sort of real, like when you actually get the vibe that they actually connect, and it's not just because the script told them to. And I think another thing that helps also is seeing Phoenix interact with other children throughout the movie, where he's interviewing them. Like, that's basically his job, is to interview them, and they talk about the future and stuff like that, what they expect from the future as children, since it'll be their future that they're going into, whatever the world ends up becoming. And I'm going to assume, this is a big assumption, I'm just taking a leap here, that these interviews are unscripted or mostly unscripted, because they feel awfully real. Like the only thing that makes it look like they're not part of some sort of documentary is that in many cases it's Joaquin Phoenix that's interviewing them. But other than that, it's literally basically documentary footage, which is very interesting. And then to kind of see the way that carries over and how he's kind of having that connection with younger people throughout it. And then comes across this person that's literally, his flesh and blood, his family, and it's the connection needs work, especially with the circumstances, because the mom, his sister, is Gabby Hoffman, and her husband is Scoot McNairy, who's having, I think it's bipolar issues, if I remember correctly. And so they need to go and take care of him, so this is why Joaquin Phoenix has the kid. And the way they handled those scenes, because a lot of stuff, establishing the relationship between him and his sister and her husband is through flashbacks, but not like traditional flashbacks where it's like we get like full scenes. But it's like, because first off, the flashback scenes are all like kind of talked through, where it's like the characters are talking about what went on, and we just kind of cut back to it without much dialogue, if any at all. We just watch the scenes from the past play out while the audio from the present day is still going on. And the way these scenes, without dialogue, sort of paint the picture. Obviously, the characters are talking about it, but you wouldn't even need that audio necessarily. Just the visuals of these past scenes are pretty much telling their own stories in this really effective way. And the way they were able to do that without having to go too much into the material of those scenes, because that also would have been like, it would have gotten very soap opera-y very fast, if not for the way that Mills just sort of made the movie and structured the movie in general, which is really great. It does have as far as like this kind of being, which like typically like you see a lot of comedies that have this setup, especially in the '90s. But as far as like a more dramatic approach, there is a lot of comedy in it and a lot of funny moments in it for sure. But even so, I was still getting a lot of vibes of Manchester by the Sea, just with obviously a much younger child. But the relationship almost felt kind of similar in how they kind of had that trouble connecting, and there was that distance, even though these characters get closer much quicker. And the way we see how authentically Phoenix plays it, as far as like, because obviously this whole thing about, questions of the future and stuff, just kind of asking questions in general, where we have the whole theme of kids answering questions about the future. But then obviously this also goes into the whole thing of a kid's favorite word more often than not is why, and adults just have to keep explaining things over and over again. So there's a lot of that, but there's done in a really effective way, where there's a really great scene where they're laying in bed and Phoenix is reading him The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and the kid's cutting him off while he's reading to ask him questions, and he's just like kind of giving these little vague, like maybe 1 or 2 word answers just to kind of appease him. And then he goes right back into reading, and it's like the tone he's reading in and the tone he's answering the questions in are the same. It's just like one tone in between where he just doesn't change, and you get the sense that he's somebody that's just trying to kind of shrug away those questions and just listen to the story and then fall asleep. But it just felt like such these real moments, especially when he actually starts to kind of elaborate further on a question, and he actually takes his glasses off and stuff like that. Like all these just little moments like that feel really real, and sometimes they can just be in the tone of the dialogue that make them feel that way, which is really great. In the way that because he's still trying to read, you get the sense that he's starting to think about the questions that the kid's asking, because he starts to stumble over his words a little more. And just the little details like that go a really long way in establishing how real the relationship feels, because this is kind of still at the jumping off point, and when they're kind of starting to get a little closer after that initial distance. And like I said, there is some stuff that this goes into that it's probably going to be profound to a lot of people, and it is to a certain degree. But if you're also at a place in your life where you're having this realization that, it turns out when we were kids and we saw adults as these ultimate figures that had all the answers and knew everything, when in actuality they have no idea what they're doing whatsoever. And how you get to that age and then you start to realize the same thing for yourself. And that's what leads you to that conclusion that, adults never knew what was going on. They never do. We're all lost in this. I feel like I have conversations about that kind of stuff with people frequently. Like I said, I'm just having constant existential crisis for at least a decade now. So a lot of the stuff like that, which is a lot of where the direction the movie's going, where its final destination is. So it just kind of felt like yeah, yeah, like you say, like yeah, I get that. I've had thoughts like that, but then it doesn't really seem to go much deeper into them. It's almost like it just kind of addresses those things, and then that's the profound nature of the movie, I guess. Um, but but it's I don't know if that would have been improved by having like long bouts of dialogue or anything like. Because like I said, a lot of the movie is just kind of showing you what's going on and showing the relationships and how people are feeling and how they react to them, which is the movie's strength. But when it does get to these points, I don't feel like it goes that much beyond the surface of what it just establishes as. This is the basically saying this is the point of the movie. This is the point we were talking about, and what the characters' um, eventual revelation is. So yeah, and I think another thing that might be a problem is for me personally is that this movie has the pace of a snail, and typically, especially for a movie like this, it would be, especially with how gradual the relationships are, um, that would be fine. But it kind of felt like the movie felt long to me, and I felt like a lot of that. The reason that didn't seem as effective to me was that it made me feel like I should probably have been more engrossed than I should have been more engrossed. It wasn't as engrossing as I would have liked it to be, or as engrossed as I would have liked to have felt. But maybe that's just a me problem. But like I said, it feels very much like the other Mike Mills movies to me, as far as how I get what he's saying, and I really like his craft and the way he goes about his approach to how he makes his movies and the way he tells his story. But there's still some I just kind of still feel like an emotional distance, to where I can't quite, fall under the spell of one of his movies just yet. But that's yeah. So, but I still do think that this is very good and very well done and very very well made. So once again, like his other two, very much respect them and admire them, but there's I feel like there's just that something's missing in regards to that one step that it would take to be into like total greatness. But yeah, so that's pretty much how I feel about that. So I think the next thing is going to be the worst movies of the year list, which should be so fun if not exhausting. And then we'll go into I don't know exactly. We're gonna have a break here, obviously, where Owen won't be here to upload things. So I guess I can use that as a planning period for whatever I'm gonna do for whatever the second half of the month and then forward. But nothing's like coming out except Scream, which will be closer to that period where we'll be kind of coming back anyway. So I don't know. I did have a couple more Emily Blunt videos I am going to do, so there'll be those. But apart from that, there is a theater that's going to have Macbeth on Friday, and they have Licorice Pizza on there coming soon. I'm hoping Macbeth is still there when they get Licorice Pizza, and I can do those at the same time. That would be fantastic, because then I might be about done with award season, as far as seeing the movies, if that's the case. Driving my car is floating around too, so I will try to do that as well. So um, we'll see how those go, and if that goes according to plan. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.